Good evening. For the first time, scientists at the University of East Anglia are speaking out in defence of colleagues who've been accused of manipulating scientific data. The affair sparked intense debate around the world just days before the Copenhagen summit. Even the United Nations panel on climate change is now calling for an inquiry into the hundreds of emails exchanged by leading academics in the field, which talk of tricks and hiding decline. And in the last hour, President Obama has announced that he'll be attending the climax of the Copenhagen summit rather than the start. Gordon Brown has just said the news gives huge impetus to the negotiations. Our science editor, Susan Watts, reports.
ClimateGate is evidence that the science has gone to bed with advocacy, and both have had a very good time.
The row over the emails from the climate unit in Norwich has been a gift for those sceptical of climate science, especially in North America. It's prompted questions in Congress, and now, as Gordon Brown and Climate Secretary Ed Miliband prepare to set off for the Copenhagen Climate Change Conference, they find themselves having to defend the integrity of the science on which the whole issue is based.
I think that we need to be very clear about this. One string of emails does not undermine the global science on climate change. And there will be people who want to use this to say somehow it casts doubt on Copenhagen or on the scientific evidence. And I think, frankly, that is nonsense. And we must resist those siren voices, particularly at this time, who want to say that, because I don't think you can take something out of an email and then somehow say that it means that 4,000 scientists who have come to a view about climate change and the effects on the atmosphere are somehow wrong.
Until now, there's been a deafening silence over the emails from the scientists at the Climatic Research Unit at the University in Norwich. Tonight, one has broken ranks, and he told this programme he feels they've been hung out to dry by frantic climate sceptics. Yesterday, the university asked a former civil servant to head an inquiry into what went on here, as concerns surfaced over the quality of computer programming at the unit, and there are questions hanging in the air for both sides of the dispute. These are the key questions for the University of East Anglia. Was any data manipulated or suppressed? Why has the UEA refused to open up all data to scrutiny? These are the key questions for the climate change sceptics. What about the two other data sets which reach the same conclusions as the UEA using independent observations and analysis? And what about the physical evidence of global warming, such as melting Arctic sea ice and glaciers? The timing of all this is excruciating for the climate scientists, businesses, politicians and citizens who see Monday's Copenhagen conference as one of the most important in human history. And with the Saudi negotiator already predicting it will have a huge impact on the conference, the question is, will any of the other 191 countries taking part use this as an excuse to opt out of a global deal?
Susan Watts. Well, we're joined now from Norwich by Professor Andrew Watson at the School of Environmental Sciences at the University of East Anglia, and from Washington by Marc Morano, who until April this year was the Communications Director for the US Senate Environment Committee and who's a leading climate change skeptic. Professor Watson, let me begin with you first of all, and the email that in a way has caused the most controversy. If I just read a bit from it, it says, "I've just completed the trick of adding in the real temps to each series for the last 20 years, and from 1961 for Keith to hide the decline." Now, hiding the decline tricks, I mean, this sounds appalling, doesn't it?
It does absolutely sound awful. You're invited to believe that what he's saying is the world is actually cooling, but this trick will try to convince the whole world that it's actually warming. And, of course, it doesn't mean anything like that. It's been taken completely out of context. They're talking about one line in a diagram in a relatively obscure report in which they are looking at temperatures over the last 1,000 years, trying to reconstruct them, and they use a particular method with tree rings, and it works well up until about 1960, and then it goes wrong for reasons which there are lots of papers on, which we don't need to go into.
Well, what about the other email which talks about deleting some emails?
I don't know about questions of deletion and freedom of information. and I can't really comment on that. I don't work in the Climate Research Centre, but I can comment on the science issues.
Now, the review set up by your university is one of the questions in it is whether the data is going to be has been manipulated or suppressed. Can you guarantee to us that it hasn't been?
I am absolutely confident, firstly, that no data, raw data has been lost, and secondly, that my colleagues would not have manipulated the fundamental data. They have not done that. They have occasionally tweaked a diagram so that in the case of the decline thing, they plotted real temperature data from thermometers along with their tree ring data.
OK, well, let's hear whether those explanations satisfy Marc Morano. It's a question of tweaking.
Yeah, Professor Watson's been all over saying this doesn't affect the case of global warming. Harry's admitting on your program tonight he's not even aware of all the specific issues necessarily and has no comment on the Freedom of Information Act. His colleague, Mike Holm, at the University of East Anglia, is saying this is authoritarian science, is calling for suggesting this IPCC should be disbanded based on the ClimateGate revelations. George Monbiot is saying that many of his friends in the environmental and the climate fear-promoting business, as Professor Watson is, are in denial. You have to feel sorry for Professor Watson in many ways here.
Professor Watson, Professor Watson, are you in denial?
Absolutely not. My excited colleague in the States is, I'm afraid, just way, way over the top. You've got to look at this. You've got to look at this rationally. What's happening here is that because the skeptics can't attack this science, they are attacking the character. They're using character assassination on the scientists who are doing it.
In fact,
wow,
Marc Morano, the climate change secretary here, said today that one string of emails doesn't undermine the science.
Of course it doesn't.
No, but it exposes the manufactured consensus. So, Professor Watson, what do you think of Mike Holm's call saying this is authoritarian, that this is partisan, that it exposes it, suggesting the UN has run its course? What do you think of Edward Zerwato, a UN scientist, who says that now that he can't believe what's happened here, and he is also saying, along with Hans von Storch, that they should Jones should be banned.
Professor Watson.
That Jones should be banned from the process, sir. You can't act as though this is skeptics. Your fellow colleagues
Hang on a
are
second,
saying
Marc Morano.
this.
Let him answer your
question. Will you
question.
stop shouting?
Sure, I'll stop shouting.
Oh, good. I don't agree with Mike Hume that the IPCC has run its course, and I don't agree with a number of those people. The thing that, but what I would agree with is that the science. Will you shut up just a second? That the only thing that science has got going for it is that it must be absolutely and totally open, and we have to look at the important issues, not the issues of character assassination.
Marc Morano, I want to ask you, what effect do you think this is going to have on the Copenhagen summit? I mean, presumably the timing of all of this wasn't coincidental.
Well, first of all, Copenhagen was going to be a wake anyway. President Obama had said the U.S. wasn't going to do anything. European environmentalists were
President
attacking
Obama has just said he's attending not just the start of the summit, but the climax of the summit, which Gordon Brown believes is going to add weight to the negotiations.
He's probably attending because they're circling the wagons because of the magnitude of this scandal. You have UN scientists turning on UN scientists. This is the upper echelon of the UN, and it's been exposed as the best science that politics and activists can manufacture. Professor Watson's whole argument is, trust me,
Professor Watson, this is a disaster, isn't it, for the people campaigning on climate change?
It's a real setback, not because there's anything wrong with the science, but because the character assassination and the temperature of the debate, which you can just see from our colleague in America, is just obscuring the important issue, which has the world warmed in the last 100 years or not?
We'll have to leave this, as you both said, a very heated debate, literally. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Marc Morano and Professor Andrew Watson from the UA.
What an asshole.